Have you ever heard of a common sense test? It's a fun test with questions that seem easy, but be careful. These questions are designed to trick you. Many adults get the answers wrong, even though they seem obvious. Why are these questions so tricky? They play with words and make you overthink. Instead of using common sense, you start imagining complicated situations. Here's the funny part. Kids are often much better at these tests than adults. It's surprising, isn't it? You'd think that with all their experience and knowledge, adults would have the upper hand. But that's not always the case. Why? Children see the world in a simpler way. They don't overthink things like grown-ups do. Their minds are free from the clutter of overanalysis and second-guessing. They take things at face value and often come up with the most straightforward answers. They listen to the question and give the most obvious answer. This simplicity is their strength. They aren't bogged down by the complexities that adults often impose on themselves. For example, one question asks, how many months have 28 days? It's a classic trick question. Adults might start thinking about February and forget that all months have at least 28 days. They get caught up in the details and miss the obvious. A child would simply say all of them because it's true. Their ability to see things clearly and without unnecessary complications often gives them an edge in these kinds of tests. It's a reminder that sometimes the simplest answer is the best one. So next time you're faced with a tricky question, try thinking like a child. You might just find that the answer is simpler than you think. And who knows, you might even beat the grown-ups at their own game. Let's look at another question. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you overcomplicated things? It's a common human tendency to overthink and overanalyze, especially when faced with a problem that seems tricky at first glance. A man gets caught in the rain with no umbrella or hat, and he seems to be in a bit of a predicament. You might start thinking about all the possible ways he could stay dry, but not a single hair gets wet. How? You might imagine him finding shelter under a tree, or perhaps he has a waterproof jacket. Did you start imagining strange scenarios? Maybe you thought of him using a newspaper as a makeshift umbrella, or running to the nearest building. The answer is much simpler. The man is bald. Sometimes the most straightforward explanation is the correct one. Adults often try to find the most complex solution. We tend to think that if a problem seems difficult, the solution must be equally complicated. This makes them miss the obvious answer. We get so caught up in our thoughts that we overlook the simplest possibilities. Sometimes the simplest answer is the right one. Next time you face a problem, take a step back and consider the simplest solution first. You might be surprised at how often it works. Section 4. Simple questions, silly mistakes. These common sense tests are funny because they show us how our brains can trick us. We often think we're being clever, but sometimes the simplest questions can trip us up. It's a reminder that our minds can play tricks on us, leading us to overthink and make errors that seem silly in hindsight. We try to be too smart and end up making silly mistakes. It's fascinating how our brains work, isn't it? We assume we know the answer, but our assumptions can lead us astray. It's a humbling experience that shows us the importance of thinking things through carefully. Remember the question about the pink bungalow and its stairs? Bungalows don't have stairs. It's a classic example of how we can overlook the obvious. We get so caught up in the details that we miss the bigger picture. It's a gentle nudge to pay attention to what's right in front of us. These questions remind us to slow down, listen carefully, and think simply. In our fast-paced world, it's easy to rush through things without giving them proper thought. Taking a moment to pause and reflect can make all the difference. It's about finding clarity in simplicity. Don't let your brain overcomplicate things. Sometimes the simplest answer is the right one. Embrace the straightforward approach and enjoy the process of thinking things through. It's a valuable lesson in mindfulness and staying present in the moment. Section 5. Remember to think simple. So, the next time you face a tricky question, remember the common sense test. Sometimes the most straightforward answer is the right one. Don't overthink it. Use your common sense, and you'll be surprised at how easily you can solve problems.